Enjoy early access to ad-free episodes each week when you subscribe to Wedding Planning Podcast Premium in Apple Podcasts. Enjoy the show. Hello there, and thank you as always for joining me today to talk all things wedding. I'm really excited to continue our conversation from Wednesday. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the risks of judging a venue by its initial price tag, specifically an all-inclusive venue versus a blank space or DIY style venue. So what I mean by blank space, it's not traditionally used as a dedicated wedding venue. So anything like a rustic lodge, a ranch, a barn, a community center property, an empty space, basically anything that doesn't already have all of this set infrastructure and staff to be a dedicated wedding venue space. Lots of budget-savvy couples see their venue selection as a great opportunity to control costs and to set the stage for major savings down the road. And this can be a great strategy when it's approached the right way. The problem is that as we're doing the research and gathering venue quotes, impulse can take over. What seems like a great deal on the surface can quickly spiral into a complete money pit if you're not careful. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So here's a fact for you. All-inclusive venues pack a major sticker shock factor. When you open that quote from an all-inclusive property and choke on your coffee, please know that you're not alone. We're talking about a lot of money, maybe the most money you've ever invested anything in up to this point. So given that sticker shock, maybe you're intrigued by the flexibility and the creativity that a more blank space, non-traditional venue can offer. Combine that curiosity and intrigue with a much lower initial price tag, and we have a perfect recipe for a magical solution to your venue and budget needs. Or, worst case, we have a situation where trying to save money on your venue can completely backfire and result in you spending more than you would have had you chosen the seemingly more expensive option to begin with. To frame the rest of our conversation for today, here are two sample venue options. Option number one, you're quoted $200 per person for an all-inclusive venue experience at a beautiful property that you and your fiance love. With your estimated 130-person guest count, that's $26,000. And no, that number does not include service fees and gratuities. Option two, your best friend from college grew up on a beautiful rural property with a perfect outdoor area for a wedding, and her parents would open it up to you for free. If you're planning within a set budget and you're trying to get the most for your money, and really, who isn't doing that? Then this is really, really tempting, right? Not so fast. Let's go through a list of key categories to consider if you're tempted to commit to a really affordable or maybe even free blank space venue over that pricey all-inclusive option. I really, really want you to have all the tools that you need to make an informed decision so that you don't make the mistake of falling in love with the quote, free price tag, yet actually wind up spending as much or even more than if you had taken the easier route of just booking that all-inclusive venue at the beginning. A general caution in wedding planning, quotes can be really deceiving unless you really dig deep into what's included and what's not. And I'll give you a little bit of a spoiler alert here. When choosing your venue, there's not a right or wrong answer. If you have more time than money and you don't mind being really heavily involved in all of the planning and the logistics, then a blank space venue might be a perfect option for you. But it's really important to know the full scope of what you're signing up for. I'm assuming that you're not going to ask your guests to bring their own lawn chairs and coolers and hamburgers to barbecue on a community grill. So you are going to be on the hook for a long list of logistics that will be required for a successful event. If you're feeling doubtful about the amount of time, effort, and enthusiasm that you personally have for becoming your own full-scale event planner, but the thought of saving a lot of money is so tempting that you're willing to just get over it and do what it takes, stay tuned so that you really understand the implications that this decision will have for your budget and for the wedding experience that you ultimately share with your friends and family. So here we go, a list of 6 major categories that you will need to have firm plans and detailed pricing information for to determine if using a blank space wedding venue is actually worth it, or if you'd be better off going the all-inclusive route. So the first category we need to really look closely at is logistics and infrastructure. So here are some things to focus on in this category. And you'll have to excuse my voice. I am getting over a little bit of a cold, but I wanted to record this and get it out to you, so I hopefully will sound better next time we talk. Restrooms are number 1 on logistics. Are there enough restroom facilities for your guests? If there are not, you're going to need to rent portable restrooms. And guess what? Those things are really, really expensive. Talk about a budget item that is not fun to spend money on. Porta potties would be number 1 on my list. Next point is a power supply. You need to make sure you have enough electrical capacity for all the lighting, the catering, the music, the sound. And if you don't have enough electricity available at that venue, you're going to need to bring in outside generators. This is number 2 on my list of things that are not fun to spend money on, and renting generators is quite pricey, so keep that in mind. Moving down, parking. Is there adequate parking space for your guests? If not, you may need to arrange for guests to park off-site and take in shuttles. Shuttles are quite costly as well. You'll also need to consider any permits and regulations that come with your venue space. So for this one, you're going to need to check local zoning laws, noise ordinances, and any required permits that you'll need to hold for an event, especially regarding alcohol service, which we're going to talk about later on in the show in more detail. So the permits and the regulations, this isn't necessarily expensive, but it is going to require some very detailed research and planning on your part. So it may become time consuming, and the consequences of not researching that properly and dotting all your I's and crossing all your T's could be really catastrophic. So very, very important to be tuned in to the permits and the regulations that your space comes along with. And next thing to consider is a weather plan. Whether it's summer in the desert or winter in New England, you have got to have backup weather contingency plans, whether that means tents or indoor options if it's 110 degrees outside, shelter for rain or extreme heat and cold. Tents are very, very pricey. Not all facilities have air conditioning. So again, run through your mind of your intended venue and see what you're going to need to plan for in terms of weather. And then last up here in our logistics column is accessibility to lodging and services. Now, if your dream venue is hours and hours and hours up into the wilderness in the middle of nowhere, then that is likely going to be an unreasonable hassle for your guests to get up there and find a place to stay and or get back home on the actual wedding day. So if you're going to be putting 100 guests in a near impossible transportation situation, and there is not a given set of reasonable accommodations for them to be able to stay at your wedding location, then I would suggest continuing your search and looking for something that's a little bit closer and a little more accessible. All right, now we're going to shift into category number 2, and this is rentals and setup. So first of all, you're going to need to consider rentals, tables, chairs, linens, dishes. Unlike a traditional wedding venue, a DIY wedding venue space usually requires renting all these simple things like things for your guests to sit on, places for them to eat. If you've done any investigation into event rentals, you know that they come with a really hefty price tag, and this could easily turn into a budget buster really, really quickly. If you're going to be celebrating your ceremony and your reception in 2 different areas or 2 different locations, you'll also need to consider that you might need double the amount of chairs. And again, event rentals, major expense. So I would really recommend getting a couple of quotes for your estimated guest count so that you have a realistic idea of what this category will cost you. Think about the lighting and the decorations that are involved at this blank space venue that you're considering. String lights, candles, uplighting, lighting in general. It might not come with lighting. I know that sounds crazy, but trust me, I've been to venues that needed to have complete lighting brought into because literally all that's there are bare light bulbs hanging off the top of a rustic cabin. So lighting is a big one. Decorations is a big one. Make sure you have a realistic vision for how you're going to rent and or buy and or haul all of that stuff in. And then very important last note there is to make sure that you have enough electrical outlets and enough voltage to actually support what you want to have happen. We touched on electricity in our last section. What about a dance floor? If you're outdoors in a backyard on a forest floor, you might want to consider a rented dance floor so that people aren't dancing in mud or dirt, slipping on wet grass, or digging high heels into earth. Of course, a dance floor is optional. You may not even plan to have dancing at your event, and that's fine. But if you are, dance floor rentals is another really big expense, and a lot of couples don't even think about that. So please get a quote for a rented dance floor if that's something that you're going to need in the space, because I would hate for you to be surprised at, the 11th hour by finding out how expensive these things actually are. And then let's talk quickly about signage. For a property that is not a designated event space, you'll need clear directions so that people know where to go for the restrooms, the parking, and all the various experiences such as your ceremony, your reception, where's the bar, where do we go for cocktail hour space. So you are going to need to design and or buy clear signage so that everyone can relax, enjoy the space, and know that they're in the right place at the right time. And you don't have 100 guests asking you 400 different times where to go for what. And our next category for today is a big one, a big expense point, and that's catering and bar. So the considerations that go into the food and the drinks this is a big one. So first of all, you're going to probably need some form of kitchen facility. Does the space you're considering have an adequate prep area and, very importantly, an adequate storage area? If there is not enough space to prep and store things, you may need to have your caterers bring in extra equipment. And guess what? Extra equipment means that that's an added expense for you. Your kitchen facilities might also really limit your options in terms of caterers who are willing and able to come in and work in a non-traditional event space. So that's something really important to consider. And then next here in the food and drinks category is refrigeration and ice. So I touched on storage. Yes, you need ample refrigerator space if you're bringing in food that needs to be stored for multiple hours. And then in terms of ice is a really precious resource when it comes to hosting any event. And it might be harder than you think to find ice and pick it up and keep it frozen. If the nearest convenience store is 30 miles away and you need to send someone back and forth for ice 4 times, that's not going to work. So you need to have a plan for your ice and your drinks and then your food storage. And then next up here on catering, you need a serving staff. Even if it's a buffet style, you still need someone to be setting up all that food and making sure that things are replenished and making sure that everything runs smoothly. If you're hiring an actual professional caterer, then you don't so much need to worry about this. But if you are self-catering, then you'll need to find a staff of food preparers and servers so that you have a smooth execution. And then for self-catering, you also need to rent or buy full place settings. So plates, silverware, napkins, drink glasses, just to name a few things. And obviously, you can go as casual or as fancy as you want to get here. But I will say, if your vision does not include your guests eating off paper plates, then just be realistic about the feasibility and the expense of putting together your own catering situation. And then last note here about the bar specifically are alcohol service and alcohol restrictions. So some locations are going to require special permits, liability insurance, and you have licensed bartenders on the property serving. So make sure you know the rules, explore the associated costs before you make a commitment to that non-traditional venue space. And here we are on category number 4. And this one, we're going to focus on your guest comfort and your guest experience. So first off, the seating arrangements. You'll need to have enough seating for all parts of your event. We touched on this in the first section about rentals. I won't go into that much deeper, but make sure you have space for everyone. Here's another one that's coming up again is temperature control. Making sure people are comfortable, whether that means you need to have a rental tent, rent some fans, or rent some heaters to be brought in, depending on the season. And then you're also going to need to consider bugs, another one that kind of gets lost in the shuffle and not always proactively addressed. If you're in a buggy area in the summertime, then just make sure you have a plan for that. Accessibility is an important one. Make sure that any guests who need special accommodations for a wheelchair or for any other disabilities, they have pathways and your facility can accommodate their needs. And then the last point here with your guest experience, I'm going to call this one convenience. We talked earlier about services and accommodations, and I want to touch on that again here. I'm going to give you a real life example. So I personally love the outdoors, and I've been really closely involved in a lot of camping or camp style weddings, which I think is awesome. But I'm going to share with you one failed vision and failed attempt at that. So there was a couple considering ferrying their guests out to an island to stay in a rustic lodge for a weekend wedding celebration. That sounds amazing. Like on the surface, that sounds really, really fun. But as they started to really research and they visited the site and really explored the nitty-gritty, they realized that the availability of places to stay, the availability and reliability of the ferry service itself, and then just the lack of very simple amenities on the island was going to make their original vision very difficult to impossible to execute. I encourage you to really get back to basics and mentally run through where people will stay, where they will eat, how they'll get to and from your wedding location. You'd be really surprised at how many potential venue locations these simple questions are going to eliminate. And next category for a blank space venue that you'll want to think about is entertainment and sound. Outdoor spaces, your best friend's parents' ranch, like we talked about earlier, that place is going to require speakers and electricity for you to be able to run music, speeches, dancing. So be sure to price out the fee to rent all the speaker system stuff if you don't have a solution already in mind. And then, of course, you can also explore local DJ packages if you want to just hire a professional DJ to come out and set it all up for you. Just make sure you're factoring that into your overall budget and price tag. And last area here, actually, I have two more because I'm going to add one on to the end. So category number 6 is going to be your cleanup and your trash removal. So trash and recycling bins are really important. If you're doing a non-traditional venue space, you have to have enough garbage bins and you have to arrange for proper disposal. We take for granted that the garbage man comes to our house or our apartment every week and picks up our trash, but having to pay for trash removal services can be annoyingly expensive if this is not something that your venue is equipped for. You'll also need to have a plan for a cleanup crew. Ideally, not you, But if it is you, then it is what it is. I'll have a story here. So you can assign friends, family, or you can, of course, hire professionals to come in and pack everything out. In my wedding situation where we rented the Airbnb property, we had this beautiful house. We were there for 5 days, and we way underestimated the effort and the time that it would take to get everything packed up, cleaned up, and moved out on the Monday after our wedding. So a dozen of us ended up working for hours, just clearing out from 4 days of back-to-back events. It was pretty exhausting and not the ideal way to spend the day or 2 days after your wedding celebration is over. So just keep that in mind. And I'm going to add one more thing here at the end, call this category number 7. This could actually be an entirely separate show because there's really a lot to unpack here. I would encourage you to look at hiring a professional day of coordinator if this is the venue scenario that you're leaning towards. So a perk of an all-inclusive venue is that you will typically have access to their dedicated staff leading up to and then throughout your event. So helping really be your point person throughout the day so that you're completely removed from all of the logistics. Now, of course, you can ask a friend or a family member to take over this role for you if you're not having the budget or the desire to hire a professional to do it. That's totally fine. But especially when you're juggling all the different categories that we reviewed today as you're prepping this blank space venue, a professional coordinator can honestly be the difference between a smooth wedding day execution and a completely stressful disaster. We've done a lot of shows in the past about hiring a coordinator, and also we've talked about some ways that you can delegate someone you trust to be your wedding day point person. I'll let you decide what's right for your situation, but having someone be your day of main point of contact is pretty non-negotiable, to be honest. And if you do hire a professional, that might be an additional expense that you need to factor into your overall budget. So as we wrap up for today, here's a flow chart. Here's kind of a summary. If you're in the venue research phase, then step 1 is just to sit with all the things we talked about today. If you're considering using a cheap or free or very reduced cost price tag venue, you need to ask yourself, do I have the time, the energy, the patience, the desire to basically be my own full service wedding planner for the next 12 months of my life? And do I really want to coordinate all the various challenges that blank space venue is going to present? If that's sounding like a hard pass, no judgment, no hard feelings, go ahead and continue your venue search and look for places that are equipped to do all that extra work for you. All-inclusive venues are so easy, and you're paying for convenience. I know that initial price tag can be a shocker, and I know that budget is a big pain point for so many of us. But what I hope I have illustrated here today at the end of our conversation is that a cheap or even, quote, free, air quotes around free, wedding venue is anything but free once you've done all the million little things that you need to do to actually transform that space and host your wedding there. So don't be fooled. It's not free. It might seem cheaper, but honestly, in a lot of scenarios, once you go through the things we talked about today and you start tallying up the expenses, the cost, and that's to say nothing of your time, I think you'd be shocked to find out how close that bottom line price tag ends up being with many all-inclusive venue spaces. So it's a very personal decision. Go through the categories from today carefully and start to gather some actual pricing information for your area and the time of year that you're thinking of hosting. This is not a game show of you just guessing how much you think things cost. You need to be detailed and realistic about what you're signing up for and what the actual costs are going to be. And especially for this wedding planning situation, if you're doing all of this stuff yourself, You will want to keep a really generous cushion for unexpected expenses that I can promise you will come up time and time again, no matter how carefully you think you're planning and tracking. And speaking of unexpected expenses, little sneak peek, we're going to go into that much more next week on Wednesday. So do your research, assign price tags to each category, and then ask yourselves, is this blank space budget venue really going to be worth it? Or would we be better off investing slightly more for that all-inclusive venue and benefiting from a lot more ease and convenience? Again, no judgment. It's a personal decision. Everyone's different. If you are still all in and up for the challenge of doing a non-traditional venue space, I will share a DIY wedding venue research and setup timeline on our website. You can find that at weddingplanningpodcast.co/DIY venue, all one word. All right. Thanks again for being here with me today. Last really quick note. I love doing these follow-up shows. I love going a little deeper into what we talked about on the Wednesday show. So if you have questions, if you have topics that are on your mind that you'd like to hear more about, I have a totally open door and I really do love to hear from you. You can be in touch anytime by visiting weddingplanningpodcast.co/contact. Okay, that does it for today. Have a great day and we'll talk again next week.